morning and welcome again to The Journey. Welcome those who are joining us online as well. Glad you're with us as we are in the third week of our series all about asking for a friend. And we've been talking about this, like maybe you've been in that place before where you wanted to ask a question, but you were maybe embarrassed to ask it. So you're like, I'm asking for a friend. And I think sometimes we have those feelings when it comes to our questions about God and faith, because sometimes we're embarrassed to ask them because we might think, is God mad at me for having these doubts and questions? Is he just upset about that? But we've been talking about this, that God can handle our questions, and we all have questions and doubts at times because God is this supernatural being. He's much greater than we are. We're obviously going to have questions. If we could understand everything about God, he wouldn't be much of a God. And so we're going to have questions and doubts. And so we've been kind of weighing through some of these. And we kicked off the series on Easter Sunday. We talked about, did Jesus really rise from the dead? Last week, we talked about, when we look at Jesus of the New Testament, he seems to be all about love. But in the Old Testament, we kind of see God can be like vengeful at times. Can God be both loving and just? And so if you missed those weeks, you can always go back to our website and check them out. And today, we're going to jump right into today's topic because we're going to need some time to deal with this. And so asking for a friend, does science contradict faith? Or even, does science disprove faith? Might be a question that we might be asking as well. Asking for a friend, of course. When I think of this question, I thought, it's kind of fitting for today. It's Star Wars days. We're contemplating the creation of our universe. I thought this would be a good topic for today. And I just heard from some of you that you had questions about this as well. And when I think of this question, I think back to 10th grade chemistry class. And I can picture even my teacher right now in my mind. But I specifically remember him talking, it was kind of towards me, but the whole class too, and telling us that you would be an idiot if you believed that God created the world, or if you've even believed in God. And so that was his opinion, and looking back on that, I was like, my brain's not even fully developed, and you have like a master's degree education. How am I supposed to like debate something like that? Like I was not prepared for something like that. But maybe you feel the same way. Maybe you've had some people come at you with scientific data or things like that in the past, and you're just like, I don't really know what to do with that, and how do I make sense out of faith and science? Or maybe you're more of a logical type person, more analytical, and you see data and facts, and you're like, how does that work within the Bible? Does science contradict faith? Does science even disprove faith? See, when it comes to faith and science, it's usually kind of this picture of science versus faith. Like they don't mix at all. It's like science is about data and analytics and logical conclusions based upon data. Faith is about believing in what is unseen. And so oftentimes these are introduced or in conversations where it's science versus faith. And there's just a lot of issues arise between what science has been taught to us in schools, what scientists believe, not all of them, but some of them, and what we see in the scriptures. There's issues like creation of the world, like did God create everything, or was there this big bang? We see there's issues like dinosaurs, like are dinosaurs even in the Bible? Like what do we do with all of these fossils? There's things like the flood, or evolution, or carbon dating, and there's just lots of issues that come up when we think about creation, what we see in the scriptures versus what we're taught in schools about science. Because in the scriptures we see things like this. Colossians chapter 1, verse 15, it says this: the Son, it's talking about Jesus, Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. So here we see this picture of Jesus being fully God, and he is, as God in his nature, God was part of creation, created all things were created by him and for him, and he holds all things together. This is what we see in the scriptures. We see other things like this. Hebrews chapter 11, it says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. And by faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. And so here, again, we see by faith, we believe that God created everything at his command. So this is what we see in scriptures, but then this is not what we're taught in schools, right? We see all of these issues of this, creation versus evolution versus the Big Bang, the flood, carbon dating, all of those things. So how can we make sense out of that? Now, as we're jumping in today, I want to say this. This is a much bigger topic than what I have time to share with you today. Also, I am not a scientist. And so I've done a lot of research for this today and to share this with you, but there's so much more that we can explore about this. But I think we can at least get to the point where we can talk about the question where we started. Does faith and science contradict? Does science even disprove religion and faith? I think we can answer those questions today. And so are there some maybe scientific backings to what we see in creation, in the creation story in the Bible, and what the Bible has to say, or are they all just opposed to each other? You know, when we think of here, we see God created the world and everything in it. What we see in the world of science, they talk about things like the Big Bang, right? That out of nothing came everything. And now the Big Bang theory came out in the 1920s. That's when it was first introduced. And a lot of scientists who have no faith background, they really didn't like the Big Bang theory because it sounded a little too close to, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It actually wasn't very popular. A lot of people were opposed to it at first, but that it has grown throughout the years. And again, we see like Darwinism and the idea of evolution. These are things we're taught in school. And we see like there's dinosaurs, and this earth, they say, is millions of years old, right? With the Big Bang, as the earth formed, it's this long process of millions of years for everything to be formed. And where does that even fit within like what we see in the scriptures? Well, when it comes to believing about creation, there's a couple different concepts that are popular to believe in when it comes to this. One is an old earth concept, and one is a young earth concept. Someone who might hold the approach to the old earth concept would believe that the earth is millions of years old. When we read in Genesis, the first couple chapters are all about creation, and we see that when it says it has like 6 days when God created the world, and it will say like on the first day he created this, on the second day he created that. But that word day, on the first day, it can also be translated to the word age. So it's kind of this day-age approach. The idea of that is that the concept of time that we understand, that God doesn't function under that same concept of time. Like for us, we think of a day, a 24-hour day, and that deals with the idea of the sun and revolving around the sun and the earth revolutions and things like that. And so that's where we get like one day, but the earth wasn't created yet. And so the concept of a day is maybe different to God. I don't know if you've ever heard this said before, like to God, a million years is like a second. Have you ever heard that before? There's a story about that. There was this man, he said, God, to you, a million years is like a second, and $1 million is just like a penny. And God's like, yes, yes. And the man says to him, so can I just have a penny? And God says, sure, in a second. Anyway, a little dumb joke. Anyways, but the idea of that is like the concept of time to God isn't the same to us. And so when it talks about how he created it within the day or a day age, that could be more than 24 hours. It could be thousands of years. It could be much different than we might understand. And so there is this concept of that the world was created over a long period of time, that God created it, but it was over a long period of time. And that could fit within kind of this idea. A lot of people who believe in the old earth concept also believe in the idea of microevolution, where it would be kind of the adaptation of species. Not that a species would change DNA and become a whole different species, but that over time a species adapts and there's this microevolution. The idea is like we have all of the different breed of dogs, but they can all be kind of taken back to like a wolf, or the idea of like there's all these different kinds of horses, but they all have the same DNA from one horse. So there's kind of that concept of microevolution that would go along with that. But some people believe in a young earth concept. Now, a young earth concept with the idea is that you can look through the Bible and you can see people's birthdays and how old they are in that sense. And so you can trace back historical records that we have outside of the Bible and see like this happened and we see this in the Bible, so we know this happened within this year, and then you can trace back the ages of people back, and they would say that the earth is about 6,000 to 10,000 years old. And then some people would, if you were in science, you would say, no, carbon dating, we know the world is millions of years old, it's very old, and but the people under the young earth model would say, well, maybe God created the world with texture already, that it wasn't just like a little baby earth, but there was kind of age and texture built into the earth. Or they, not all of them believe in that in a sense either. They might say that when the flood happened, it really changed the dynamics of the earth because it was a global flood and introduced all those things. And so, but then you have things like carbon dating, and like how does that work when we look at how old things are? And well, carbon dating isn't always 100% accurate. It's kind of a flawed science. There's debate about carbon dating. Some people would say that we have way more carbon in our environment now than we did in the past. And so it's not quite accurate as you kind of tabulate it over the years. Also, they would say that the flood kind of introduced a lot of different carbon elements, so that throws off carbon dating. So there is some science that you can look at to kind of think about those concepts. But then you have like the flood and like dinosaurs, and like why don't we see like dinosaurs in the Bible? Well, part of that is the word dinosaur wasn't even around back when the Bible was written. It's kind of a newer term. You see terms in the Bible though like behemoth or leviathan, or even in kind of ancient records outside of the Bible, you see a lot of societies in historical data have things like dragons that they talk about, or the Great Flood. So we see that like these things are talked about in kind of folklore of many kind of cultures. And so was there dinosaurs? Science would say dinosaurs happened a long time before man was around. But if we look at what Scripture says, it says that God created dinosaurs. Could there be dinosaurs like with humans? Could God have created that? And so, again, we see some terms in the Bible that could reflect towards that. And there are some interesting things to consider too. Like Noah could have had dinosaurs on the ark. It probably wasn't the giant dinosaurs, like a Bronchiosaurus or something like that. It could be a smaller dinosaur. Again, it doesn't say he took two of every type of species. It took two of each kind. And so maybe he took two of the smaller dinosaurs. That could have happened. Some people would say that's ridiculous. But also you look at some interesting things like there is, across 13 states out west, there is what is called a fossil graveyard, where all of these fossils are found. And it all happened at the same time because they're all in the same layer of sediment. And so there had to be a thing of catastrophe. It could be the flood. Science said it might be an asteroid. Again, it could be either one, but there is also other things we see, like a fossilized sea creature, like a fish, found on a mountaintop. Well, how does that happen? That's interesting to consider. And then you see there's other science that you can look at to see, like, if the flood happened, like what would be the ramification of that? In the Bible, it talks about how before the flood, that it had never rained before. That there was kind of this layer of moisture in the atmosphere that was kind of held above things. And then when God released that, that's when the rain came and flooded the earth. But before that, it was all held kind of in the atmosphere. And some people would say that the earth then, for the most part, was an all tropical location. Wouldn't that be nice? Michigan as a tropical location. That's what they would say. That's what it all was. I don't know if I want that, but I like winter. But anyways, and then when the flood happened, all that moisture relieves, and obviously sets the climate for our world into a whole different span. And so there were things in the Bible talks about, like where mountains are raising up out of the water. That could be volcanic situations. That could cause the fossil graveyards. It could cause fossils on top of mountains. We see these mountains rising up, and so some people would say that's volcanic type thing. And so as you have this whole new atmosphere of moisture and cold in the environment introduced with the idea of volcanic things happening. It could cause somewhat of an ice age in kind of the northern and most southern parts of our world. So there is some science that could go along with what we see in creation. And when it comes to science, we think of like evolution. Like evolution, there is different opinions on that. What we see from what Darwin first introduced, there's been a lot of changes and shifts into that, but they also comes up short in some spaces. Like we've never seen any species go from one DNA to another. Like over the course of what we have recorded in human history, we've never seen that. We've never seen even a transitional type animal, and we've never found any kind of transition of a fossil either. We've never found a transitional fossil. Some people would say, even the idea of creation, of how God created things, that they would really push towards the young earth model, because even to think about how things evolve and how things change, that, God created the plants and all the trees and this earth. And then it says, like, the next day he created the animals and things like that. Like, if you think about how complex our world is, like, you need to have those things working together. Like, animals need plants to eat, so you'd have to have the plants first. But also, plants need animals because they help pollinate the different plants. It all works together. And so some people would say a long period of evolution doesn't really work with how our world works. And so that's, I think, an interesting thing to consider, using science and faith to how maybe those things work together. And so those are things to think about as well. And so, when it comes up like the different species evolving, again, we've never found a fossil that was in process of evolving. And some people would say, I don't even know if that would work. There's actually cellular understanding now that how there's like these folds in cells and how much time it would take to evolve from one thing to another thing. And we've, like a mathematician worked that up and said, that's not even possible. It'd be like hundreds of billions of years old it would take in order for a cell to divide in such a way. Or you think of this, like if something evolves and it needs a reproductive partner to evolve at the same time and at the same place in order to make that all happen. Because if something evolves and the male version and the female version evolve someplace else, if they're not in the same proximity or in the same time, then the species dies off. It can't really even happen. So again, science doesn't always come out clean either, even though they might like to present themselves in that way. When I think about like science isn't always right either. There's been times in the world of science when people have said the earth is flat. And that was a common understanding throughout the world. And after that, there has been times when they have said that the earth is the center of the universe. And that has proven to be false as well. Science isn't always right. And there's other examples of that. But the idea is this, is that when it comes down to science, you can take data, you can take your process, but you're still making a hypothesis or a theory. The Big Bang is a theory. Evolution is a theory. It takes faith to believe in them. What it takes faith, and they would say it takes data, and this data shows that this could happen, but it's still a step of faith to believe in those things, to trust in those things, to say this is the way things happen. It's really a step of faith either way when you think about it. And for us, as we maybe consider following God, or maybe you have been following God, that's a step of faith. But that doesn't mean you have to check your brain at the door. We can make a reasonable, educated step of faith, even when it comes to the things of our faith. And so, as we're thinking about that, the question comes back to where we began. Does science disprove God, or faith, or religion? And the answer to that is, it really doesn't. I mean, the things we talked about today, science doesn't prove God, science doesn't disprove God. You can't come to those conclusions. And so, but it doesn't have to be science versus faith either. They can work together. In fact, not only are they not enemies, it turns out that the birth of modern science is actually born in Europe with a lot of Christian influence. And even throughout the history of our world, many scientists have come from a religious background. Some of the concepts and assumptions where science starts with in modern science are actually formulated out of the Christian faith. I like to think of it this way. I've heard this said before, that God gives us two books. He gives us the book of his words, the Bible, and he gives us the book of his works, creation, nature. Both of them show us a picture of God. Faith and science can work together, and they can actually deepen our faith. It says this in Psalms 19. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. So the heavens, creation, declares the glory of God. The skies proclaim his works. It's the book of his works. Day after day, both these things, the heavens, the skies, they proclaim his speech. They show his works. They reveal his knowledge. I don't know if you've ever had that where you're just kind of out in nature, and I had this the other night. I was just outside, and the sky was clear. You could see all the stars. And I just thought, like, how can someone not believe in God who created all of this? And you just have those feelings when you kind of get away from it all and slow down, and you look at this, and you can see that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim his works. It's the book of his word and the book of his works. I like this. There's a guy named James Chung. He actually was a student at MIT, and now he's like kind of a campus pastor on the area. He says this: science deals with the how, but faith deals with the why. When they try to work in other areas, they tend to get a little off base. Both speak of different kinds of truth if we accept them both. Like science deals with the how, like how things work. And then faith deals with kind of the purpose behind it, the bigger picture of it. And the Bible isn't meant to be a science textbook. And science isn't meant to define or even disprove religion. They both, though, are the book of God's works, and they both speak different kind of truth if we're looking for it. You know, science always goes on what is known and seen. Most scientists tend to be more analytical, logical, and so when they begin in these schools and they're always focused on the results, on the data, time after time, I can see where it can be a struggle for them to have faith. But this is kind of the science versus faith is really new, because in the past, science and faith has always been together. And it doesn't have to be separate. It doesn't have to be verses. But in another sense, too, something we have to consider is that science doesn't explain everything. Science can't explain everything, especially when it comes to who we are on the inside. Science cannot explain our capacity to love and the need to be loved. Science can explain the idea of how self-sacrifice is a human element and actually brings us purpose and meaning into our life. Because that goes against the laws of nature where it's the strongest survive. Science can't prove the idea of why we're born with a moral compass. The scriptures speak to the why behind that, though. The scriptures say this. Genesis chapter 1 says, God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Both male and female, he created them. So the idea of some of these things that science can't explain of who we are on the inside, the scriptures say that it's because we're created in the image of God. Science isn't always right. It can't always explain everything. But let's look at these two books, the book of God's works, the book of his word, and if we put them together, it can help us make sense out of things. Because I think if we really pause and look, if we're looking to disprove God, you're never going to see him. But if we actually take time to slow down and look and investigate and ask questions, I think we'll find God through his word, through his works. If we continue to explore. I don't know if you've heard this story, but I have a little story I'd like to share with you as we begin to wrap it up today. Check out this story.
So one of my favorite stories is in a mother's womb were two babies, and one turns to the other and says, "Do you believe in life after delivery?" And the other replies, "Why, of course, there has to be something after delivery. Maybe we're here to prepare ourselves for what will be later." "Nonsense," said the first. "There's no life after delivery. What kind of life would that be?" I don't know, said the second. But there'll be more light than here. Maybe we'll walk with our legs and eat with our mouths. Maybe we'll have other senses we can't understand now. First goes, that's ridiculous. Walking is impossible, and eating with our mouths, that's absurd. The umbilical cord is what scientifically supplies nutrition and all that we need, but it's far too short. Life after delivery is to be logically excluded. And the second says, what if it's just different than it is here? Maybe we don't need that physical cord anymore. The first goes, okay, if there were life after delivery, then tell me, why has no one ever come back from there? Delivery is the end of life, and in the after delivery is nothing but darkness and silence and oblivion. It takes us nowhere. And the second says, but certainly we'll meet Mother, and she'll take care of us. The first goes, Mother? You actually believe in Mother? If Mother exists, where is she now? And the second goes, she's all around us. We are of her. It is in her that we live. Without her, this world would not and could not exist. And the first says, I don't see her. It's only logical that she's not here. To which the second replied, sometimes when you're in silence and you really listen, you can perceive her presence. You can hear her loving voice calling down from above.
I think that's an interesting story. It is just a story, but it makes you think about maybe there is something more. Now, if you're coming at it from a faith aspect, obviously you see the big picture there. If you're a scientist, you would say, that story's nonsense. A fetus cannot talk to another fetus. They can't even talk at that point of their development, right? That would probably be their response, which is true and logical, but there's something more there, right? I think the point of this is that, if you come at life from a scientific view, and that's the only perspective that you have, I think you're going to miss God. And there's going to be other things you miss as well. In the same sense, if you come at everything from just a faith aspect and just kind of check your brain at the door and don't explore the book of God's works as well, that's not the right way to go. We can end up mistreating people or making wrong assumptions. So I think there has to be somewhere in the middle. And the question is, can faith and science work hand in hand? I think it can. Even if you're a logical and a results-based person. I think of it in this way. Like we believe in the wind, right? The wind blows. We can't see the wind, but we can see when the wind blows things. We can see when the effects of the wind. The same is true with the Spirit of God. There's going to be some things that we have to trust in faith because he is the invisible God. But I can think we can see the effects of him working, the effects of him in creation, the effects of him working on who we are on the inside. And if we take time to really ask God to give us more understanding of maybe his word or his works, if we ask God, if you're real, reveal yourself to me, I think he will actually do that. But we have to have that open mind for that. Because what happens is this, Romans chapter 1, verse 20, this is how it's been. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature has been clearly seen, being understood from what he has been made, so that people are without excuse. So it's kind of going back to that Psalms 19. Like the heavens display the glory of God. He has made himself known through his word and through his works. And although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. And although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal human beings, birds, animals, and reptiles. So here it's kind of saying these people, there were some people who thought they were so smart, and it's been this way throughout history. But then they don't turn to our God. Instead, they began to worship things of this world, or they began to worship things that are in the image of things of this world. And while I think of this debate, they might not worship an idol of something they've carved to look like an animal, I think people can end up in this place where they worship data and their own knowledge and understanding. And what I know from my experience is when I think I know it all is when I don't know anything. That's when my thinking becomes futile because I think I'm so smart. What I've come to find is that the more I humble myself before God to realize that he is bigger and greater than I can understand, but he has given us a brain to use to explore the things of his word and his works together. When we look at those hand in hand, then he can grow our thinking instead of thinking that we know it all, we've seen all the data. Because when we do that, our thinking becomes futile and we have foolishness in our hearts. And I think so many people end up in that spot. And so let's continue to have open hearts to God, but also open minds to know his word and also see him through his works. I'm going to ask you just to close your eyes with me as we wrap this up today. Maybe your response is, God, I don't know if this is all true yet. God, if this is true, reveal yourself to me. Maybe your response today is, God, I don't understand all of this stuff. May you help me grow in my knowledge, understanding of you and your works. Maybe today is, God, thank you for your creation. Thank you for making me in your image. I don't know what your response is, but just take a moment in the quietness of this and just respond, and God hears our prayers. God, this is such a big topic for today, and God, as I think about this, I'm just grateful that you want to reveal yourself to us through your word, through your works, through creation, through how you've made each of us. I think about the complexity of even our bodies or the complexity of our world or our universe. God, I can't help but to say you are an awesome God, the creator God. And that you created each one of us to know you is just even greater, God. And so we just pray that you might reveal yourself to us, that we might know you maybe for the first time, but reveal your ways to us and your works to us, that we might deepen our faith for those who trust you, God. We tend to open ourselves up to you. In your name we pray. Amen. We're going to close with a song.